my love letter to alcohol. This is Rise and Grind podcast solo episode, and it has been 1 year. Oh, Lucas making an appearance in the background here. It's been 1 year of being alcohol free, and if that makes you feel uncomfortable to listen to, knowing that I'm gonna riff on the last year going through this journey living alcohol free, if that makes you like kind of cringe a little bit, I would encourage you to A, stop listening, or B, continue to listen, because if it makes you feel that way, maybe there's something within you that actually wants to listen. It's just you don't want to, or you may feel uncomfortable with some of the things that I bring up here, that you can maybe, I would say, acknowledge or at least relate to, that you know deep within yourself isn't the healthiest of choices, or just doesn't align with your vision. Now, I am by no means a psychologist, a doctor, none of that stuff, but I want to take you through my journey and share with you some of the educational pieces that I know to be true, that were instrumental in making it through a year alcohol free. The first and foremost thing that I think was very, very important is having a ride or die spouse that I can share things with. And I remember a year ago, like literally a year ago today, my wife and I were out walking our dog, and I think Mav was with us, but I remember spitting it out of my mouth, hey, I'm thinking of stopping drinking. And I'd gotten to that point, admittedly, numerous times before, where I felt like, I had a little bit of an issue. I was still, quote, socially acceptable in terms of drinking. But I remember feeling like I wanted to spit those words out of my mouth before, but I never did, like numerous times. And I remember exactly where we were when finally those words stumbled out of my mouth. And that was the trigger point to my alcohol-free journey. It's incredibly important to have someone in your corner that supports you no matter what. And Sarah, my spouse, my wife, is definitely that for me. That could be a totally different podcast episode. But having someone in your corner that doesn't judge and just listens and supports is huge. Number two is having a community. I was blessed enough to stumble upon a few podcast episodes by a guy that has a company called Alcohol Free Lifestyle. I'll refer to Alcohol Free Lifestyle as AFL moving forward in this episode. His name's James Swanwick, and he's an entrepreneur, and he created this Alcohol Free Lifestyle company. It helps successful people, entrepreneurs, middle-aged folks stop drinking. And there's a few massive pillars to the AFL program, but one of those main ones is community. And doing something or going on a journey solo is much more difficult than being in a like-minded community. And I went through the AFL program, which was 90 days, where there was Zoom calls bi-weekly, and also a community, kind of like a Facebook group that was really helpful. And through those 90 days, what I loved about it was the Zoom calls were education based. They helped educate me on what alcohol is, what it does, how it affects dopamine. Talks about the advertisement of alcohol. Some of these things I'm going to get into here shortly. But it was instrumental in not only making it through those first 90 days that are the most difficult, but also just peeling the curtains back and revealing what alcohol truly does to you and how addictive the drug is. So I'm going to get into some of that in a little bit, but before I do, you'll notice that I don't use the word sober, or I don't use the terminology like recovery, and that's by design. That's very purposeful, and that was something that James at AFL really hammered it home to us. Is the concept of, and in his opinion, why AA has such a low success rate, which is well documented. The concept of like restraining from something and not being able to do something and living a life that is constrained by like not being able to do something because you have an issue, and you always have this issue because you're always in recovery, and that's just your identity now is in this space of whether it be like holding back from something or not being able to do that specific thing. And what James does is he kind of flips that on its head, and he encourages you to do something, meaning you get to live an alcohol-free lifestyle. You get to enjoy life without a substance present. You get to enjoy all of the benefits that come from living an alcohol-free lifestyle, and you need to embrace living that lifestyle and doing those things to make your body feel well and have energy and have focus and live in gratitude of having your health, wealth, and happiness all in line with what you're doing on a daily basis. And I would say that has been the biggest shift in my mind to where I've been able to make it a year living alcohol free, is because I'm not restraining from doing something. I'm not resisting the urge. I'm embracing living a positive lifestyle. And whether it be alcohol or whether it be some other thing that you know that you do regularly that maybe isn't the best for you, I'd encourage you to go down that path. Instead of resisting doing something, you want to embrace something else. And in real estate, I found a similar kind of concept of like not thinking about my business of like selling houses, and more of how do I build relationships with humans being a lot more beneficial. Because in sales, we kind of focus on the paycheck, the money too much, where I'm like, no, the paychecks actually come from the relationships of people that I get to meet. And so that's a different aspect of looking at things. And it's a lot easier to be in the grind of sales when you look at it like you have the privilege of doing something instead of I need this to happen, or I need to be restrained by a substance. So a couple parallels there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I do want to nail home the fact, like, being able to give yourself the freedom to track down something beneficial as opposed to being restricted is a massive, massive shift in your mind that I think is a better foundation for long-term success. Admittedly, I don't count days. I don't really go to any meetings. I don't do any of that typical stuff just because I really don't believe in it. I don't even tell people like, hey, I'm never going to drink again. I'm sure I will. I'm sure there's going to be a time and place. Not sure when that will be. Might be never, might be next month. I have no idea. But I just try not to judge that and just let it be kind of what it is. I know that it's been a year because simply the last time I remember drinking was after the Labor Day tournament at Southeastern last year. Blew a lead. I was pretty upset, and we all know how that goes. So yeah, the AFL community was huge. So the getting to live or choosing to live an alcohol-free lifestyle and having that embedded into my mind and having a foundation to build off of was a big piece. Secondly, the educational piece of getting taught what alcohol actually does to your brain was really, really beneficial for me. And I would say that got me my first, what is called like a breakthrough. In the 90-day program, it's evergreen. So that means when you enter the program, there's people at different days in that 90-day journey as what you are. And there was people in their 50th, 60th, 70th day that would come on these calls and be like, I finally had my breakthrough. Like, I finally, I'm not having urges anymore. And this community was a lot of highly successful people. And AFL had a very, very thorough vetting process to even get into these calls and into this program, and they charged accordingly. Hindsight, it's the best investment I ever made tenfold. So the breakthrough for me, and I remember being on like day 30 or 40 and being like, "Ah, this is just a grind. Like, this is brutal. Like, all I want to do is like have a cocktail in the evenings." But I remember being on this one call, and they were the coach was talking about the dopamine cycle that alcohol is viciously attacking and initiating every time you take a drink. And there's two pieces to this. Number one, just understanding that alcohol is an artificial gateway for dopamine to be flooded into your brain. And over time, if you use alcohol like I used to, just in the evenings, have a couple drinks, maybe a couple more on Saturdays, socially probably don't have an issue. Wasn't putting any harm or stress on my relationships by any means, but I just felt like shit more times than not in the mornings. And what I started to learn through AFL is that the brain wants to feel good. And instead of going for a walk in the evenings to reduce my stress and anxiety, it just makes a lot more sense and a lot easier just to pour a drink. And when you do that over and over and over, the brain doesn't know any different. And it's just like, hey, it's my time to have my nice little dopamine hit and have a temporary relief of stress and anxiety. Just go pour that cocktail and we're good to go. Okay. Now, what I didn't understand was that artificial dump of dopamine is obviously very addictive because your brain wants it all the time. But when you have alcohol in your system and you give your brain like this out to have easy dopamine, that also works as a further depressant, anxiety-inducing toxin. I mean, alcohol is a downer. So yes, you may have temporary relief of that stress and anxiety, but long term, you're actually ratcheting up your baseline stress and anxiety. Also, to this point, when people do like Sober October or 30-day challenges or whatever, don't drink for a week, people can find these periods as very boring, or being like they'll feel very flat. And that's because your dopamine levels, when they get artificial dumps via like not a natural thing, like if you go for a run, you get a dopamine high, that's a good natural dump. If you get artificial dumps of dopamine or something triggering it, your baseline dopamine levels, so say like a moderately happy person is like 6 out of 10 happy. If they win the lottery, they're 10 out of 10 happy. If they're sad, they're 3 out of 10 happy. Over time, if you consume alcohol regularly, your baseline dopamine levels drop. So, and I definitely in hindsight can see this. It felt like I was walking around at a 3 or 4 out of 10 happiness just on a regular day. When I would have alcohol or a couple drinks in the evening, my happiness would be like a 6 or a 7. But your baseline actually reduces over time. And that's why people that drink socially, if they sustain or withhold from drinking for 30 days, they find those 30 days to be very, very boring. That's why the AFL program was 90 days, because 90 days is enough time to help that dopamine be reset to normal levels. Your baseline dopamine. I certainly felt that. Like, I remember being very tired, wanting to nap a lot, whether that be from boredom or just general tiredness. That's a very common symptom of not drinking. Had no idea about that, but until you get taught these things, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And that dopamine cycle that you can very easily research is ingrained in the habitual nature of having cocktails in the evenings or on the weekends or whatever the case is. And I could definitely see that. And then another big piece to this was just understanding, like, my brain just wants a break. My brain just wants to be dialed back. And that's where I felt alcohol was the most helpful, is just taking that mental chatter from like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, and it just would dial it back to a 2 or 3. And so when you go without your substance of choice, that chatter is very, very loud for the first 30, 40, 50 days. And I felt like until I totally understood why, it was tough for my mind to naturally just get quieter in the evenings. And that educational piece was very, very important to me. And there is some reasoning or some rationale out there or some research to where some people have the gene. And whether it be people say, oh, alcohol runs in your family, I don't believe that, by the way, but I do believe that there are people that are more susceptible to liking substances that create dopamine dumps than others. And we certainly talked about this in AFL. And I would just say, like, if you have an addictive personality like I do, the chances that your dopamine dump is going to be bigger when you take a drink of alcohol or whatever you like doing is going to be way greater. The way I explain this is like, you know, if I have a weed gummy, for example, it doesn't really do anything for me. I just want to eat some chips. Like, it doesn't really get me that excited. But I remember when I would have a drink of alcohol, it would be like the 4th of July blowing up in my brain, like just feeling so nice and so relaxed. And I know a lot of people don't get that sensation, but I know that I have a very addictive personality. I know that if there is a gene or whatever the case is, there's some research out there saying that 50% of people have this gene mutation of having an addictive personality. I certainly have that. Then I just have to acknowledge, like, hey, when I do this, I'm going to have a greater reaction and greater response than most people. And the final breakthrough, this was like on day 70, is understanding when I look at my life, I do very, very few things, meaning I love my family. I feel like being a dad is a big part of my life. I do it really well. I try to be the best husband that I possibly can. I try to be the best real estate agent as I can. I try to do as much of relationship building as I can because it helps my business and I like connecting with people. I really like that. If you think of these as like silos, I only have a few of them. I love golf. I try to be as good as I possibly can. There's nothing that I do that's half-assed. If that's the case, I don't do it, period. So why would it be reasonable to think I could have 1 or 2 drinks? Like, let's just throw all the cards out on the table. And this is me being as vulnerable as possible with you guys. Why in the hell would that make any sense? If I can only do 3 or 4 things and I focus on them really well and I try to do them at the highest level possible, that does not align with being able to have 1 or 2 drinks and being like, nah, I'm good. To me, what's the point of having 1 or 2 drinks? All that makes me want to do is have more drinks, and I have more drinks because I don't do anything half-assed. So if that sounds like you, or if you do feel like you do have a problem, there's a lot of things that I just talked about in the last 8 minutes where maybe you could do a little bit more research on if you wanted, or maybe you could be like, that's interesting. I want to go down that path a little bit more, maybe educate yourself. Again, I'm not a expert in explaining these things by any means, but hopefully those are some topics or points of interest for you. The last part to that is just, I remember in AFL talking about big alcohol. So those are like big alcohol companies and how much money they spend on advertising. And annually in the States, it's in the billions. And it is very much an alcohol-infused society, especially when you're trying to live alcohol-free. You start to notice where all the alcohol is, and it's freaking everywhere. And when I see advertisements for alcohol now, there's one theme that I see in all of them. Whether it be Bud Light, whatever Wisers, whatever alcohol is, they try to romanticize and sell the 3-drink buzz. And this is something that I've noticed. This isn't from AFL. It's not from anything I read. But like all the commercials, if you're watching a football game or hockey game, everyone's having a good time in these advertisements, or they're selling a lifestyle. They're selling like how you feel after 3 drinks. They don't advertise what it feels like the day after. And that's reality. Like, they just won't go there. And there's so much money involved and so much sponsorship that big alcohol has a massive control in their advertisements, and I think it kind of brainwashes you over time. So just be aware of that next time you see one. Like, what are the people doing in the advertisement? Like, think about how much money it would be to have that ad on that Super Bowl commercial or whatever the case is. So there's a lot of meat there that hopefully you guys can either reach out to me. I can definitely send you resources or send you in the right direction. I can also, hopefully give you some ideas of what to research, how to research, or maybe even just a different train of thought or mindset hacks to help you deal with whatever you may be feeling like you're dealing with. This is certainly an uncomfortable podcast to make, by the way. Like, I was thinking, like, okay, I got to frame this out, what talking points, and then I just press play, and here we are. So hopefully it didn't seem too jumbled up. Really proud of myself for going a year. It's crazy how fast time goes. I remember thinking that a year is going to take forever, and boom, we're here. So I would encourage you that if you've listened to it this far, and you're not just listening to this because you like my voice, which there's no one out there that would, maybe it's time for you to make a decision, make a life choice that can only be for the better. I didn't even get into, how much better I feel, how nice it is not to feel like someone's judging me, or not having that crutch of always wondering where my day's going to end up to where I could have a beer at a restaurant. The amount of time spent thinking of a substance of your choice is, and I'm not kidding, tenfold of what you know right now. Until you remove that and you start embracing living a healthier lifestyle, then you'll realize it. Quick story. I remember last fall we went to Vancouver for a little weekend getaway, and it was my first, quote, vacation, being alcohol free. And I was shocked at how, my habits of being on vacation was how do I manipulate this situation to get to a brewery, to sit on, the coastline and have a beer? And I was laughing at myself, and I even told my wife that, I can't believe how much time I spent, trying to figure out, that'd be nice to have a drink over there, or hey, let's wind down and play cards and have a drink. It was always that caveat to the situation. It just doesn't need to be that way. And if I can do it, certainly anyone else there can do it as well. So I hope that serves you well. 22 minutes of me mumbling about not drinking. It's crazy. But it is what it is. It's life, right? Hope you guys are doing good out there. Reach out. Don't be afraid to say something. It can only be for the better. Rise and grind. We'll see ya.